the doctor says, aha, you have diabetes. And the problem is there's a whole bunch of different kinds. There's the sugar diabetes, there's diabetes insipidus, which is the pituitary gland problem. What we're looking at though with type 1 and type 2 is generally hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia just means your blood sugar's too high. And we look at it as if your average is over 5.7, is more or less, then you have hyperglycemia on an average basis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fixed Blood Sugar webinar. Ooh, that was kind of fun. It was like, your screen was going crazy. I was like, this looks like a scary movie. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you here. Say hello when you hop on. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just make sure that that is working. You never know if the chat will work. So let's see what I can do there. Today's going to be a fun day. I was actually just talking with Dr. Saunders. We are going to talk about some vocabulary, type 2 vocabulary. I was going to write up a quiz and quiz everybody since I know how to use the polls now, but I didn't do that. We'll keep it where we won't be graded. But it's going to be fun. This is going to be really informative. Feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A. That's the best place for me to manage that. And then if you're on Facebook, feel free to comment in the chat as well. Let's see. Let me double check this. There. Now everyone should be able to chat with us.
There'll be a pop quiz at the end.
Yes, there will. All right, we have Terry and Eve are on from New Brunswick. Hello. Quite a few of you still hopping on here. So wonderful. So glad to have you guys here. Joe is in a meeting with our leadership team today. And so he won't be able to join us, but it's okay. We got this. BartonWebinar.com is the website where you can find out more information about these webinars, about type 2, about our products. You can find a link to our YouTube channel and all the wonderfully amazing things that we do. So there's also on that page, there's also a top 10 most frequently asked questions area. And I really recommend you go check that out because even though maybe you've been on the webinar for a while, these are still questions that come up all the time. And you maybe have even forgot about some of them. For example, you know, how does Dr. Saunders feel about sugar alternatives?
How do I feel about things? That's important.
It is important. What he's seen in his practice, and many of you know this as well, but it's interesting to learn these things. And so we put those top 10 questions there because we do get asked those a lot. But anyway, okay, let's go ahead and get started. Dr. Saunders, will you give us a disclaimer before I start asking you all these big vocabulary words?
Okay, so the information that we provide is for general audience use. It applies to groups of people and may not apply to any one individual. So it's really important that you take the information and ask the question, does that apply to me? And sometimes you may need professional help to find out if that applies to you. So you're not going to just, because I told somebody, gee, that wouldn't be a good idea to take your medication, doesn't mean, well, everybody's going to go, oh, doctor told me not to take my medication, boom. So just make sure it applies to you, that's the right thing for you too.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Some of these will be very easy questions for some of you. Those of you who maybe are new to diabetes or type 2, some of these, maybe you've been afraid to ask what they really are, or maybe your doctor didn't really give you much information about what this means. And so we're going to go through all of these words that you maybe have been hearing and have questions about. So some of them will be pretty basic, and some of them, Dr. Saunders was trying to stump me with some big words that I had never heard of. He wanted me to ask about them, but I don't know. If I've never heard of them on any of the webinars, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, so the first question, or the vocabulary that we would like a definition to, I guess. What is blood glucose and blood sugar? Are they the same?
Oh, good question. Excellent. So blood sugar is blood glucose, essentially. Yes, they're the same. Sugar is the general term for all different kinds of sugars and even starches. So some are like sucrose is a fructose and a glucose together. The fructose is used by the body more like a fat, actually, than a sugar. And the glucose then is taken off and put in as blood sugar, and that's the glucose. So yes, glucose is blood sugar.
Okay, and why is this reading or blood sugar important?
Because you have to have a constant level of sugar for certain certain body parts, certain tissues in your body to function properly. So your brain does not store any sugar. There's no storage at all. So you have to have it in your blood all the time. And if you don't have enough, you're going to feel it. It's important for the brain to function because it needs the sugar all the time. The heart, same thing. Kidneys, same thing. If you don't have enough sugar, then there's a problem.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over to hypoglycemia then. And can you tell us what that is?
Okay, that's what I just told you, not enough sugar. So hypoglycemia, hypo means underneath. So it's low blood sugar. And low blood sugar is very dangerous. In fact, it's much more dangerous than high blood sugar. Because if your blood sugar goes low, then not only do things not work well, but cells start dying. If a cell doesn't have energy, it will die. And muscle cells store energy. So it's really rare for muscle cells to die with hypoglycemia. But brain cells, heart cells, kidney cells, nerve cells, those are the ones that die from low blood sugar, from hypoglycemia.
Okay, let's move on to hyperglycemia.
So hyper is too much. So what is too much? Well, that's what people with diabetes are diagnosed with. So we call it diabetes because a long time ago, somebody didn't know about the blood sugar being high. All they knew is somebody's peeing too much. So the word peeing too much in Latin turns out to be diabetes. So people are, when they have high blood sugar, their kidneys let go of extra sugar, and that causes them to urinate a lot. So they get really thirsty. They're drinking all the time, and they're peeing all the time, and drinking and peeing and drinking and peeing. And they go to the doctor and they go, I can't even sleep at night because I get up 5-10 times a night to pee. And so the doctor says, aha, you have diabetes. And the problem is there's a whole bunch of different kinds. There's the sugar diabetes, there's diabetes insipidus, which is the pituitary gland problem that causes of peeing too much. So what we're looking at, though, with type 1 and type 2 is generally hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia just means your blood sugar is too high. And we look at it as if your average, so that's the hemoglobin A1C, is over 5.7, is more or less, then you have hyperglycemia on an average basis. As opposed to having sometimes hyperglycemia, like right after you eat, your blood sugar goes up to 150, but then it comes right back down and your average is normal.
Okay, let's go back to the hemoglobin A1C and tell us again what that is.
Oh, okay.
Average what?
Hemoglobin A1C. Oh, that's really interesting. So the hemoglobin is a molecule that has the iron in it that moves your oxygen around, right? And your red blood cells are filled with hemoglobin. That's what makes them red. So what they do is over time, your red blood cells are swimming around in your blood, right? They're moving all the way through your blood. And sugar is attaching onto that hemoglobin molecule. And depending on what your level of sugar is, you'll attach more sugar onto that hemoglobin molecule. If your blood sugar is really low, then you will attach less to that hemoglobin molecule. So since a red blood cell averages about 3 months, then we can measure over the last 3 months what your average blood sugar is by how much sugar is attached to that hemoglobin molecule. And that's called the hemoglobin A1C. So they actually have numbers, and they're kind of just general vague numbers. If your hemoglobin is 5 point, if your hemoglobin A1C is 5.1, that will give you an average blood sugar over the last 3 months of about 100. If you're in the fours, then you're under 100. If you're 5.6, then you're around 120 average blood sugar. So those aren't exact numbers. Those are just kind of what might be expected on average.
Okay, so since we're kind of talking about blood sugar numbers, where do we want our numbers to be?
Okay, good question. So ideally, you want your hemoglobin A1C to be right around 5. So if it's 4.9, 5.0, 5.1, that's excellent. I find that in most of the population, 5.4 is kind of more average. If you get up to 5.7, that's pre-diabetes. If you get up to 6.5, that's diabetes. So that gives you kind of a range of where the optimum is around 5 and where diabetes is around 6.5 or above. And I've had people who were 12, 13, 14, really high numbers. Their average blood sugar is 250 or 300. It can get pretty high. Ideally, you want your blood sugar, the glucose, when you're monitoring, either if you have a continuous glucose monitor or if you're using a finger stick, you want it to be in the 70 to 90 range. And that is an ideal, and it is optimal. Even though they say, well, it's okay to be higher, in a sense, yes, it's okay to be higher, but there are issues with that. And that is that if your blood sugar is generally higher, then you're going to have decreased glucose transport proteins, like for your brain and for your kidneys and for your nerves and the other cells. So it's not just insulin, it's actually also glucose transport proteins that are affected. So ideally, you really do want it between 70 and 90.
The visuals are so good, Dr. Saunders. Are you guys loving this? I feel like I have a new visual for some things now. Even the hemoglobin, I'm like, I didn't actually know that was how it was working. So this is so good. It's giving me ideas. We might need to make like a type 2 adult coloring book where you can actually see what's happening with each vocab word. Oh, it'd be so good. The body is so amazing. And I feel like every time you teach about it, I'm just blown away. It's amazing. So, okay, let's continue. I got distracted with my coloring book here. So this isn't a vocab word, but we're talking about good glucose numbers. How does that vary throughout the day? And because someone will ask, why might it be lower or excuse me, higher in the morning than it was when they went to bed?
Okay. So there are a lot of factors that enter into what your blood glucose is going to be. So we like to simplify things and say, okay, I eat this, my blood sugar goes up. I eat this, my blood sugar doesn't go up. And that's as easy as it gets, right? Or I exercise, my blood sugar goes down. I do a different kind of exercise and it doesn't go down. However, the body is not that simple. There are so many factors that enter in. There's a lot of different hormones and peptides that affect how your blood sugar, how your level of blood sugar. So the example you gave was really good, and that is, let's say I go to bed at night. I don't eat anything before I go to bed. I check my blood sugar and it's 85. And I go, perfect, really nice. So then I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning, check my blood sugar, and it's 120. I'm like, what the heck? I didn't eat anything. I was sleeping all night. I'm not exercising. I'm not doing anything. Why is my blood sugar 120 in the morning when there's nothing in my stomach to raise the blood sugar? Well, you have in your body the capability of making sugar, and it's called gluconeogenesis. Your liver can actually take proteins and make sugar out of them. Um, um, because remember, your brain needs sugar. So what if you couldn't eat for days? Where would your sugar come from? Well, your liver can make it. So, and there's another part, and that is you have storage in a lot of different cells, like in your liver and in your muscle cells. You store a kind of a starch called glycogen. Glycogen is a bunch of glucose connected to each other, and that's the storage for that cell. So if there's no sugar outside, then the liver can take that glycogen and pull it out and put it into your blood to raise your blood sugar so that your brain has enough sugar to function. So let's say you go to bed and it's 85 at night, and then while you're sleeping, your body's still metabolizing, right? Your muscles aren't working, but your cells are. Most of your cells are doing stuff. So your blood sugar is gradually dropping down. You didn't eat anything, so you don't have any sugar coming in, and it's dropping down. It gets below 70. It gets below 60. And when it starts getting really low, the pancreas puts out a hormone called glucagon that tells your liver, hey, we need sugar here, make some sugar. So the liver then takes that starch, the connected glucose molecules, and cuts them all up and just starts sending glucose out into the blood. So then your blood sugar starts going up. And you have a little bit of insulin resistance, right? So your liver's making that sugar go up, and you start making insulin, but because you have insulin resistance, the sugar just keeps going up instead of leveling off at a normal level. So whereas somebody without insulin resistance, they go to bed at 85, they'll wake up around 85, or let's say 90, because their liver put out a bunch of sugar. But because type 2, you have insulin resistance, and it just keeps going up, and it makes it a little higher than usual.
And that's not concerning to you?
No, that's not a problem at all. It's an indicator that you still have insulin resistance. So that's why we talk about if you're only going to test once a day, just test the morning fasting, and that should be between 70 and 90. And there's good reason for that. So even though you went to bed at 85, if you wake up at 120, you still have insulin resistance, and there's still a ways to go.
Okay, good information. Okay, so we've kind of talked about, let's go back. Let's talk a little bit more about insulin and insulin resistance. Is there a test for that? What do we need to do there?
Okay, there is a test. Many labs are doing what's called an insulin resistance index, which they take how much insulin you have, what your blood sugar is, what your hemoglobin A1C, and they put it together and they create an index that says if you're 1, then that's normal. If you're higher than 1, then there's levels of insulin resistance. Resistance just means that your cells are filled up with glycogen and they're done. They can't take in any more sugar. So they stop making insulin receptors. And so they're blocked, or they just stop making them, actually. So that now the cell can't take any sugar in because there's no insulin receptor to take the sugar in. So the insulin comes along and doesn't find any place there, so it has to move on to another cell. So your insulin level will go up because it can't bind to anything. So then also, though, the sugar can't get in the cells, so you eat something and your sugar goes up. But it can't get into any cells, so it just keeps going up and up and up, and it doesn't stop going up because it can't get into the cells. Your brain doesn't need insulin to work. Your brain can take glucose into the cells without any insulin at all. So they have this constantly open door. The door is open for any glucose for your brain, no problem. But most of your cells, like liver cells and muscle cells, all your muscles, they will actually block off the insulin. So what's interesting about that is that fat cells don't become insulin resistant. So you could be wasting muscle because you just can't get any sugar into your muscle because you have insulin resistance. And at the same time, gaining fat because the fat cells aren't resistant to insulin. And insulin is the signal that's telling them, make more fat, make more fat, make more fat. And then it's just telling them to keep making more fat. So they're making more fat. And those fat cells are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And meanwhile, you don't have any energy. You can't do anything. And all of this energy is being stored and can't be used because of the high insulin. Insulin blocks you from using fat for energy and tells your fat cells to make more fat. So insulin resistance with the high insulin levels is a real problem.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Okay. Let's talk about type 2 versus type 1 definitions.
Okay. So it's unfortunate we use the same word diabetes for type 1 and type 2 because in a sense, they're really opposite problems. So, but because both of them have blood sugar, so they measure the glucose. So the blood glucose goes up in type 2 and it goes up in type 1. So they go, oh, that must be the same problem. But actually, in a sense, it's the opposite problem. So remember I was saying with type 2, your cells are full of sugar. They're just jam-packed with sugar. So the cells stop making insulin receptors so that you have insulin resistance. So the insulin goes up and the sugar goes up. And that is type 2. Type 1 is just the opposite. You have these cells with a whole bunch of receptors all over them, but you can't make any insulin. Your pancreas doesn't make insulin. So there's no insulin in the blood around the cells. So the cells are going, I need sugar, and it's making more insulin receptors. But there's plenty of sugar there, but the sugar can't get into the cells because the glucose can't get into the cells because there's no insulin to unlock the door and let them in. So your brain's fine because your brain can function on high blood sugar. That's not going to be a problem because the door is always open for them. But for other cells like muscle cells and other cells of the body, they waste away and die. So what do people die of when they have type 1 diabetes? They don't have insulin, so they can't get food, which is glucose primarily, but also amino acids, potassium into cells. And so what happens is the cells waste away and die, and they die of starvation. So it's like dying of thirst in the middle of the Mississippi River. How does that happen? Well, if you can't get to the water, if you can't get it in, then that's how the cells die. So that's why insulin is so important. But type 2 is too much. Type 1 is not enough. That's what I mean by opposite.
I have chatted with quite a few people who don't know if they have type 1 or type 2. They just know that they have diabetes, which I think is really interesting. That makes me wonder how much they're being educated from their doctors.
Yeah, you have to know that. You have to know if you have type 1 or type 2. And how do you know? It's really simple. measure an insulin level, measure a C-peptide level, and look at your insulin resistance index. All of that will be really helpful.
Okay, this is so good. Okay, so let's talk about C-peptide. What is that?
Okay, C-peptide. Okay, so your pancreas makes a protein, and it's not very long. It's not a big protein. It's kind of a small protein, and it's a hormone, right? But when your pancreas makes it in the islet cell of the pancreas, it doesn't do anything. It's not active. It has to leave the pancreas, go out into the blood, and then there's a piece of it that's cut off. And then you have these 14 amino acids that is the peptide. That's the insulin that is active. So once that is activated, you have this other little piece left over. And that little piece left over is called a C-peptide. And the reason that's so important is because if someone is like, let's say your doctor gives you insulin and you're injecting insulin, it doesn't seem to be working, and you're injecting more insulin, doesn't seem to be working. And you say, well, I want to know how much insulin my pancreas is making. Well, if you were just to go do an insulin level, then you're going to get those 14 amino acids, which you just injected into your body, or you injected them yesterday. You still have some of those swimming around. You don't even know what's yours and what was injected from the Humulin or other forms of insulin. So there is the C-peptide level that you can measure, and that will tell you that came from your pancreas. So is your pancreas making insulin? That's one question that C-peptide answers. The other one is insulin lasts for like 10 minutes. It has like a 10-minute half-life. It's really short. So when you take the blood sample, well, not from your finger, but if you take an insulin level, that's what it is right there at that moment. In 10 minutes, it could be totally different. Because why? Because you could secrete more from your pancreas, because it could be swallowed up by the cells that now have insulin receptors on them. There's so many factors involved in your insulin level, but the C-peptide, guess what? It's not used. So it's just floating around. So it gives you sort of an average of what your pancreas is making. So if your C-peptide is around 1, then that's pretty good. If it's 0.5, then you're probably not making enough insulin, and you might have a type 1 kind of problem. If it's 3 or 4, then you might have too much, and that's a high insulin problem. And that's exactly the best. Well, it's one of the better ways of knowing if your pancreas is putting out insulin and how much.
So good. Okay, so those of you who are just joining us, we are doing some type 2 and type 1 vocabulary. And just going through all of these words that you maybe are hearing and still aren't real sure what they mean. We've talked about blood sugar and blood glucose, A1C, insulin and insulin resistance, type 1, type 2, C-peptide, glucagon, hyper and hypoglycemia, and probably some other things in there as well. But those are the main ones that we wanted to chat about. And we do have quite a few questions about some of those things. So we're going to get into that. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to get through as many as we can. And if you think of any other words that you hear often in your office that you think we should define, feel free to shout it out.
Okay, deal.
All right. Here's a good question. So Randall says your glucose level numbers in the US are different than what we use here in Canada. So our numbers begin in the 3s and they go into the 20s. So right now, Randall's arm monitor reads 8.7. Are you able to tell us how that relates or relays?
Yeah, I think 4 to 5 is equivalent to that 70 to 90 range. So 4 to 5 is ideal. 8 is up in the 150s, so high hundreds. would be 8. Yeah, so that'll kind of give you an idea of where you should be. Thank you. Thanks for asking that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good question there. What David says, what is a normal blood sugar level for an hour after a fairly large meal with some carbs?
Okay. If you have a normal functioning metabolism, it can go up to 110, maybe 120, and that's normal, what a normal functioning metabolism. If people have like a big meal with carbs, especially if they eat fat with carbs, because the fat makes you insulin resistant, so then the glucose will go up even more. Yeah, it can go into the 200s in people with insulin resistance easily.
Okay. Seju says, for some time now, I've been having hypoglycemic episodes, so I've stopped taking Cinachroma since I started having these episodes. What should I do?
Oh, wow. If you're having hypoglycemia, then you need to know why that is, because it could mean that your pancreas is putting out too much insulin. And so because some people, when they eat glucose, the glucose goes up, and if it gets over 120, the pancreas goes, oh no, the blood sugar is going way up, and puts out a whole bunch of insulin. And then the sugar just goes down and tanks and goes down low. And so some people chase their blood sugars. They call it brittle diabetes. They're chasing their blood sugars all over the place from, way high to way low, way high to way low. So hypoglycemia is not normal and not good. So it depends on the reason why. So the first thing you need to know is how your pancreas is functioning. So for example, there's something called a 3-hour glucose tolerance test. And that test is pretty simple to do. They give you a glucose syrup and you drink the syrup. Well, first they draw your blood and check your insulin and sugar levels. Then they give you the syrup. And then an hour later, they check your glucose and insulin. And then 2 hours later, glucose and insulin. And that gives you an idea of what's going on there. So I actually had a case like this a couple of weeks ago, where we didn't know what was going on with this guy. And it turns out that's what we found, that they gave him the glucose, he drank the glucose, and his next blood sugar an hour later was like 150, whatever. But the insulin was still kind of low. The next one was just the opposite. The insulin was 85, and the blood sugar was down in the 36. So it was just his pancreas was reacting too much to the elevated glucose. So I put him on a ketogenic diet. And you know what that is? It's phase 1. It's really easy. It's phase 1. And so I put him on phase 1, and because what that's going to do is he's not going to take in any high amounts of sugar. So since he's eating very small amounts of carbohydrates, his blood sugar is not going to go up that high. So what that'll do is stabilize his insulin as well. As he becomes less insulin resistant, then he won't have that reaction.
I'm curious to know how many of you are new on this webinar today, or maybe aren't familiar with the Diabetes Solution Kit. Would you mind commenting? You can do that in the chat or Q&A, whatever's easiest for you. Just let me know if this is your first time on the webinar, or if you've never seen the Diabetes Solution Kit. I'll quick show you, but this is what you'll hear us talk about quite often. And we talk about the different phases. So even, Dr. Saunders was saying it was just like phase 1. And phase 1 is kind of an eating plan, I guess you could say. There's a lot more to it, but eating lower carb, et cetera. We go through that in this book. And this is the same thing that Dr. Saunders tells his patients to use in his office. Probably isn't printed out in this nice book, though, is it?
No.
So that's what we're talking about. You can find information about that at bartonwebinar.com, or you can email me to leslie@bartonpublishing.com. Okay, lots of good questions here today, you guys. Okay. Brian, how are you? I got to chat with Brian. I've been hearing a lot of your guys' stories and how things have been going for you, and I've loved getting to know you guys. So if you're interested in chatting about your story, email me again, Leslie@bartonpublishing.com. Brian says, hi all, lots of talk about amino acids. A friend at the gym suggested I supplement with the 9 essential amino acids to make muscle. Good idea or bad?
Okay. Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you're deficient in amino acids, then supplementing is a good idea. If you're not deficient in amino acids, supplementing is a bad idea. So the 9 essential amino acids includes things like leucine, isoleucine, valine, and the branch chain amino acids that stimulate a gene called mTOR, which is something that builds muscle. And so when you're supplementing with these amino acids, you're like, that's great, I can build muscle. But you have to be careful because there's another problem that's associated with that, and that is it does increase your risk of cancer. That mTOR gene is a risk. So you want to get it when you need it, but it's not something you want to have all the time. So if I were to recommend somebody supplementing amino acids, I would do that on a more intermittent basis, or often what I do is I test their amino acids first and look at where they are and which ones might be needed. And then you can take the ones that are needed, and that has worked really well in the past.
Okay. We have someone here asking about how do I get Synachroma? You know what? You can go to bartonwebinar.com and it'll link you to that. Actually, you know what? Barton Nutrition is probably best. If you want to look at the supplements, Barton Nutrition, and then here is a code. I will type this in a minute as well. If you use code webinar25, you will save 25%. Okay, so the code is webinar25, and then the website is Barton Nutrition. Okay, so here's Synachroma. I can just read the ingredients. I have mentioned this before. A lot of us years ago, I worked for Barton Publishing for quite some time. And years ago, when we first were introduced to Dr. Saunders, he would talk about the benefits of selenium and chromium and cinnamon and all of these things. And so we were all out getting these in different forms. So we had, all of these supplement bottles. And sure enough, eventually we all got smart and said, why don't we put it in one? And ta-da, Synachroma came around. And so anyway, we talk a lot about Synachroma, and a lot of people have really, really loved this. Dr. Saunders, what could you say about Synachroma for someone who has type 2?
Well, for type 2, the first thing I would say is it's not the answer to your problem.
Yeah.
For most people. But I test a lot of people. And most people that I test are deficient in chromium, vanadium, selenium, vitamin D, and vitamin K. So, and that's what's in this. And vitamin D makes you more sensitive to insulin. Chromium and vanadium help you use your blood sugar properly. The selenium is really important for regenerating glutathione, so you don't have inflammation. And so this is just sort of a basic supplement of the ones that I find are very common deficiencies. So it's a support. That's what it is.
Perfect. All right. Let's see here. Butch says, before starting the program, my morning average numbers were in the 170 to 190 range. In my 4th week this morning, it was 77. My doctor has me on 1,000 milligrams of metformin. The highest number has been 111 in the last week. I did have one day last week where my bedtime number was 56, did not feel any different. Should I have any concerns?
No, good question. Thank you. No concerns. I've told the story about the rats where they gave them insulin, got them down to in the 40s, and kept their blood sugar in the 40s. And what they found was happening was when the blood sugar goes low, it increases the glucose transport proteins for the brain, for the kidneys. So actually being in the 50s is as long as you're okay, it's okay. It's not going to be a problem. It does help you equilibrate your glucose transport proteins. That's what it does.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Someone said they've been to many of these webinars, but we have a lot of you who are here for the first time. So that is just awesome. I'm so glad you guys are here. One thing I want to mention for those of you who are new, if you go to bartonwebinar.com, there's a link to our YouTube channel where you can see past webinars. I did see some of you came in late, and so you will be able to catch this replay once we get it edited and posted. And if you subscribe to our channel, you will get notified when we upload videos. So awesome. Okay, how do you build muscle? Do not have excess fat at all. And I'm a type 2, 7 years old.
Okay. Well, there's a diabetes issue with that. So I'm glad you brought that up. We always talk about the glucose, right? The sugar. And the cells get overfilled with sugar. But the other thing about what insulin and what insulin resistance does is insulin allows amino acids into your cells to allow protein to be made. So the protein is made in your cells with insulin as well. So it's not just the sugar. Yes, the sugar is part of it, but building muscle requires insulin too. So if you have really low insulin levels, it's really hard to put on weight, really hard to build muscle, and really hard to build fat, to have fat. So you're going to burn fat all the time because you don't have any insulin to stop you from burning the fat. So check first, like someone who's super thin and wants to put on some muscle. Yes, you got to exercise, but you got to get protein. But it's not just eating the protein. You got to get that protein into your cells, and that requires insulin as well. So check your insulin levels. That might be a simple way to look at it and find out if your pancreas is making enough.
Okay, Krish, welcome back. Is BMI a good parameter as an index of insulin resistance?
No. BMI is not a good parameter of anything, really. It kind of just like helps us follow along with what's going on. But body mass index is your height to weight ratio, and it's not really good. So, for example, I love the picture I had of Arnold Schwarzenegger at age 35 and Arnold Schwarzenegger at age 75. And I don't know if any of you know this, but at age 35, he was Mr. Universe. And at age 35, he was like muscle bound all over the place. And his body mass index was exactly the same at age 35. At age 75, he had a big pot belly and hardly any muscle at all. And he had the same body mass index, the same BMI. So, it's not really that good.
Yeah. Okay, Martha says my recent random fasting insulin was 4.7. What does that say? My A1C was 5.6.
Fasting. Wait, say that again.
It just says my recent random fasting insulin.
Insulin. 4.7. Okay, that was an insulin level, 4.7. And then the hemoglobin A1C 5.6. Wow, that's good. That means you don't have a lot of insulin resistance. 5.6 on your hemoglobin A1C is kind of on the borderline for on the high side. It means your blood sugars are a little high, but you're not making a lot of insulin. So the insulin 4.7, it should be around 5, ideally on a fasting specimen. So if that insulin at 4.7, you had a glucose at the same time that was, less than 90, that would be really good. But if your glucose was over 100 and your insulin was only 4.7, you might not be making enough insulin. So then that would be a different issue altogether, right? Because your hemoglobin A1C is a little on the high side, so your average blood sugar is going to be in the 110, 115 range, which is a little bit on the high side. But your insulin is very normal, so you might not have enough insulin. You know, there's something we call diabetes type 1.5, and that is the insulin resistance with low insulin level. But you still make insulin, but it's not quite enough, and you have some resistance. And so you might have that.
Okay. Mary is here, first time, just ordered the kit the other day. So that's awesome. So first time, Jerome, first time, R. Paul Allen, first timer. So cool, guys. Welcome, welcome. Brigida, never seen the diabetes solution kit, but it is my first time to attend and also late, no problem. Sean says, is fat bad for type 2?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is fat can and does cause insulin resistance. So when you eat fat, then it prevents your muscle cells from taking glucose into the cell. So you get a measure of insulin resistance just from eating fat. Some people have a big effect of fat causing insulin resistance. Some people have a little effect. So how do we manage that? So we put out this book, and the book is, you know, it's written in stone. It's not like how do you have everybody do a different program when this is written down, this is what it says. Well, we allow the free foods. So the free foods are what? Well, it's broccoli and celery and lettuce and spinach and kale and all that stuff that essentially has very, very little to no calories. In fact, it takes more calories to chew it up and swallow it and digest it than you actually get from it, right? That's why they're called free foods. But they also have a lot of fiber. So when somebody has a fat problem where they're getting insulin resistance from fat, and so they're on the ketogenic diet and they're eating 20 carbs a day and it's not working for them, they're going like, what the heck? I still have all this insulin resistance. It might be the fat. So what do you have to do? You have to decrease the fat, make little bits. So what do you eat instead? Well, all the free foods. That's the idea. That's why we have all the free foods there. So that can allow you to individualize your program to how you function. So the answer is fat bad? Yes, for almost everyone.
Okay. Dan said, did the doctor just say that Synachroma is not really for type 2 diabetes, or did I hear that incorrectly?
Oh, no. It isn't the answer to your problem. It's not, it doesn't fix everything. But for people with type 2, yes, you definitely want to take Synachroma because it has everything in it that's going to help your body use the sugar properly.
For those of you who are new, unfortunately, Dr. Saunders doesn't try to give us pills and supplements instead of changing our lifestyles, which is always such a bummer. But because sometimes we just want him to give us something that will make it better, right? And we do have supplements, but those are really there to support. So just so you know, this will come up again. Okay. So many good questions. Is coconut oil okay for those with type 2?
Yes, but it's fat. So remember that it can also make you insulin resistant. So you have to be careful with it and see what's happening. So if you're getting frustrated because your insulin resistance index is not going down, then try taking out the coconut oil.
Okay. Oh, that reminds me, I used to do a lot of the, oh, now I forgot what it's called, like bulletproof coffee. So I used to have coffee with butter and MCT oil. And oh my gosh, I did that for a long time. It was good. Okay. Our local friend, Julie, how are you? What role does berberine play in reversing type 2 diabetes?
Okay, berberine does not reverse type 2 diabetes. Okay, so what reverses type 2 diabetes is the diabetes solution kit. So that's the idea of the reversal process is detoxing. Berberine does not help you detox. Instead, what berberine does is helps you use sugar more efficiently and allow you to burn fat for energy. It works in a similar manner to the way metformin works. So it can lower your blood sugar. It can improve your function. It's great for the brain. It prevents cancer. Berberine's an awesome herb, but it doesn't reverse the diabetes.
Okay, Angela is asking about intermittent fasting, and would morning fasting be better or evening?
Oh, good question. Okay. Always evening fasting is better because of the 610 reset. So we have this program, and you can go on Facebook. We have actually a Facebook group, 610 Reset. And what that is you don't eat anything after 6 and you go to sleep by 10 with an empty stomach. So the idea is when you go to sleep with an empty stomach, you become anabolic. And anabolic is the repair mechanisms of your body. The anabolic metabolism is when you're fixing everything. You fix your brain, you fix your intestines, you fix all the muscles and joints that you've been wearing out all day long. And that's really important that you have an empty stomach so that you can become anabolic every night. So yes, when you're intermittent fasting, eat breakfast. If you eat one meal a day, make sure it's breakfast. If you eat 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch, skip dinner. If you eat 3 meals a day, make it an early dinner, and don't eat 4 meals a day or anything more than that, and no snacks.
All right, a couple comments about my bulletproof coffee and MCT oil. I don't think anything's wrong with it. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. I did it for a long time. I actually don't know why I stopped. I kind of quit drinking much coffee. That's probably the only reason. But I really liked bulletproof. I think MCT oil has a lot of great benefits. It's kind of like an extreme version of coconut oil. Is that what you call it? I don't know.
Oh, it's an extract. It's
okay, yes.
a portion of the coconut oil. It's an extract from the coconut oil, the medium chain triglycerides. And the advantage of that is that goes when it goes through the liver, it's immediately made into ketones, and so it's it allows ketosis right away.
Now that I'm thinking about it again, I'll probably have to try it. I'll have to try some bulletproof coffee again. It used to be really good. And then every once in a while we'd get like homemade maple syrup, not homemade, from a tree maple syrup, fresh. And we'd put that in our coffee and it was so good. It wasn't really fresh. It wasn't straight out of the tree, but you know what I mean? When we felt like we could have sugar. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so this is from Terry. How dangerous is the use of glyburide long term?
Okay, so glyburide is a medication that tells your pancreas to make more insulin. So what happens long term is it makes you more insulin resistant. So then you need more of it, and then you need more of it. And pretty soon you've outstripped your ability to make more insulin, so that the glyburide doesn't work anymore. So it is not an answer to type 2 diabetes at all. At best, all it's going to do is temporarily lower your blood glucose because it makes more insulin. But anytime you have more insulin, when you already have too much insulin and you add more insulin, then you're going to get more insulin resistant.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Daryl says as you go through phase 1, shrinking insulin resistance, are there any purge indicators such as solid waste to monitor progress?
Say that again.
As you go through phase 1, shrinking
Yeah.
insulin resistance, are
Right.
there any purge indicators such as
Purge.
solid waste to monitor progress?
Oh, yeah. No, because it's too individual. Some people are going to have diarrhea from it. Some people are going to have constipation with the ketogenic diet and have to add extra fiber. People are so different because of the types of bacteria they have. Are there any indicators of your progress? Well, the best indicators really are glucose level, insulin level, and the simple one that makes it easy is monitoring your glucose every morning. And then for people who are overweight, are you losing weight? Because if you're losing weight, then you're burning fat. If you're burning fat, that's a good sign, right? That's kind of what you want to initiate and start to do.
Okay. If you guys have not gone to the Barton Webinar Facebook group, that's a great place to go if you're on Facebook. It's a private group, so you will have to request to be added to that, but we share a lot of stuff in there, and we would encourage all of you in that group to share, maybe some inspiring things or share some recipes you're loving, etc. Just a kind of a place for us to be a community and chat with each other. Dr. Saunders does need to leave to go see his patients here in a second. So let's see, was there another one? Okay, so Angela asked, what causes the nerve damage and can you reverse it? I'll let you answer that.
Okay, nerve damage happens because the nerves aren't getting enough sugar. They're not getting enough glucose. And you're like, what? How does that work? Because there's tons of glucose around, the glucose is elevated. What the heck is going on? Well, when the glucose transport proteins are not transporting glucose into the nerve cells, when there's insulin resistance, then you lose the ability to have that energy in the cells. So the nerves are dying. They're starving, and that's why they don't work, because they're starving. So the way to get that back is to reduce the insulin resistance. That's the primary problem.
And we just did an entire webinar talking a lot about this. I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, actually. So this is episode 160, I believe. And I want to say that was maybe 158 or 157. So if you go to bartonwebinar.com, again, there's a link to our webinars, and you will be able to watch that. There's a lot of information about that, a lot of good questions. So, okay, Dr. Saunders, thank you so much for being with us. We will see you next week. Go spend time with your patients. They're lucky to have you as always.
Will do. Bye.
I appreciate you. Bye-bye. Those of you who maybe hopped on late, we spent about the first half of the webinar talking about different or typical vocabulary words that are associated with diabetes that we talk about a lot on these webinars, or things you maybe have heard and maybe didn't fully understand. And Dr. Saunders really gave us a great visual, I feel like, for a lot of these things that are happening in our body, a lot of words that maybe didn't mean anything until we were able to kind of see what he was saying. And so I just really encourage you to go and watch this again if you missed the beginning. It will be posted probably within the next few days at bartonwebinar.com. Well, actually it'll be posted on YouTube. And again, this is, I believe, episode 160. And so there are a few, but you can search for specific topics on our YouTube channel. So if you're really wanting to learn more about fasting, type in fasting. Typically those things will come up. What else? I would love to hear your story, you guys. If you would be open to sharing your journey with me, how things have gone for you, some of the success that you're seeing, I would be grateful. Email me, Leslie@bartonpublishing.com. If we could do a video chat, I'll even send you a few supplements as a thank you, and would be grateful. We are using those videos to share with our team. It really encourages them to keep moving forward. I have the honor and the privilege, I feel like, to be on the webinars and to hear your stories and to hear how things are working for you. Whereas, everybody else, not everybody else, but a lot of people in our team don't get to hear those stories all the time. And so that's how we're really using those videos right now. We do put them on our YouTube channel, but most people don't really have access to those. So I sometimes share them in our Barton webinar group on Facebook so that you can see those. And we want you guys to see that other people are doing this, that they're taking control of their health and they're making the changes. We have a lot of you even on today that I know and that I've chatted with who have taken the Diabetes Solution Kit, done what it said, and totally changed your life. And it's been so fun to just chat with you. And some of you have been on the webinars even telling your story, and so cool. So anyway, that's it for me. We'll be back here next week, same time, same place. Thank you for hanging out with us, and have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend. We'll see you. Bye-bye.